I'm recording my homily for the 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time. I really should check that before I start recording, but 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And so I'm kind of continuing with the theme of Lectio Divina, but I'm going to go in a little bit different direction, and part of it's because of an announcement that Pope Francis made this last week on one of our teachings, and so I'm going to kind of tie those together. But so remember with Lectio Divina is a type of prayer last week that I was talking about that says that we can't fake that type of prayer. Either we're doing it or we're not doing it. And it's a very special type of prayer because it forces us to purify our prayer. So Lectio Divina is when you take a Bible passage, scripture passage, something very short, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, and then you begin to allow yourself to be drawn in to something that Jesus wants to speak to you about. And so you pay attention to what your mind and what your heart is cueing into. And it might be a word, it might be a phrase, it might be something beautiful that you love, and it might be something that you hate. But something gets your attention, and then you allow yourself to speak to Jesus with it. And then you begin in that process, you begin to listen. And I think that's one of the hardest things. It's not complicated, but it is one of the hardest things for a person to do, a Catholic to do. And it's a sign of true maturity when somebody has the ability to listen to Jesus. I mean, listen deeply. And it requires time and self-surrender to that. And we're not always cued into that. But anyways, okay, so Lectio Divina. What it does is it purifies our prayer. Now, it's tempting in our prayer. Some examples I used this last Sunday. It's tempting in our prayers to ask Jesus for specific things. In other words, we've already gone into prayer with an agenda. It's like, these are the things that I need, these are the things that I want, and these are the outcomes that I already desire, right? So we've already gone in with an agenda. Now, maybe we're not quite that controlling. Maybe we go in and say, okay, Jesus, here's the things going on in my life. So, I'm gonna listen to you. But a lot of times we go in with an agenda. It's like, okay, Jesus, this is what I want. This is what I'm hoping for, right? We're struggling with money. So what do? We go in and we place the lottery ticket in front of us and like, okay, Jesus, come on, bless it, right? And it's like, that's just because we're struggling with money doesn't necessarily mean Jesus wants to give us more money, right? I'm standing in our Stations of the Cross outside for a reason. Because the nature of how Jesus works is often the opposite of what our human nature desires. Our human nature desires for life to be easier, more comfortable, and Jesus doesn't usually desire to give us that, because that's usually not where peace is. Peace is when we're working for harmony, we're working for justice, we're working for peace in our world, those kinds of things. Okay, mercy, all that. All right, now, if you're sitting at the bus stop, right, we got a bus stop right over here. You're sitting at the bus stop and somebody walks up to you and says, what is it that Jesus desires? What does Jesus want to do in our lives? Why did God create us? What does he want to do? And I would think that it basically comes down to this. Jesus wants to give life. Jesus wants to give life. Life, L-I-F-E, right? He wants to give life all the time. And I don't necessarily mean just husband and wife conceiving a child, giving life, kind of giving life, but he wants to give life. In the Bible, the blind man, he wants to give him life. When he gives him sight, he gives him life. The man who's crippled, who's lying there by the gate, he wants to give him life. The woman caught in adultery who's going to be stoned to death, he wants to give her life. He wants to set him free. And so in our prayers, in our lives, Jesus wants to create life. He's always looking everywhere. He's looking to create life. Now I want to use that because I want to talk about not just our prayer, how Jesus wants to always create life in our prayer, but also just the issues that we have around us. So Pope Francis came out last week and gave a declaration on capital punishment. So capital punishment on, so those who are serving on death row, who are waiting to be executed, Pope Francis came out and he said, now you have to understand our teachings. So Pope John Paul II, Saint John Paul II, a number of years ago came out and said that sometimes capital punishment is justifiable. To take the life of someone who's incarcerated is justifiable when it's necessary in order to protect the lives of innocent people, right? And so I think he was saying if it's a last resort, if we have no other way to do it, then it is justifiable to do that. But he also said, and it says this in the Catechism, it says that those conditions are very rare. And he left it at that, right? So I want to talk about some of the principles about life with regards to that. Now, Pope Francis has since come out and said, and this is all he's changed, he said that he does not believe that in our modern world there are situations where it is justifiable to execute a prisoner, to execute someone who's in jail, and that we can keep people safe without executing them. Okay? That's what Pope Francis has come out and said. Now, obviously, this is a political issue, right? It's a moral issue, but it's a political issue. And so Pope Francis hasn't really changed any of our teachings. He simply has changed the parameters where he's saying it's justifiable. Now, let's go into the principles a little bit deeper. So you have the principle of life. All human life. All human life is precious. That's a core teaching of us. All human life is precious. We do not, as human beings, have the right to lower the dignity or value or dignity or value of any human life. When we do that, sometimes we're all tempted to do that, we put people in a box, right? And we say, these people's lives are less valuable than these people's lives. And for whatever the reasoning is, usually our reasoning is out of fear, but we take a group of people and say their lives are less valuable. We often do that when someone from this group does something really bad. And we kind of lump them all together and we say their lives are less valuable. Right? We did that in the United States with the Japanese here. Because we went to war with the Japanese, we immediately assumed that all Japanese were now a threat, right? That's why we formed the internment camps for them, okay? So we have a tendency to do that, and why do we do it? We do it out of fear. Why are we racist? Honestly, there's times in my life where I struggle to overcome sometimes my prejudices, and it's usually when someone from a particular group, particular race, particular religion, whatever it was, did something bad. And so my mind wants to then blame them all. And I have to fight that, because whenever we do that, we stop doing what God does. And that is, He holds all people's dignity and value as being precious and equal. Nobody's life is more important than the other. I know it's hard for us to imagine that, but in God's love, His love is so great that He can't increase it anymore, nor can He decrease it. So His love for us is the same, because it's just as much as it can be. So Adolf Hitler, when he began to lump people into groups, and then what did he do? He began to make judgments on whose lives were more valuable and less valuable, and then he began to systematically murder the people whom he considered to be less valuable. Okay? All right. So we can't go down that path. That path's not a good path. All right? Now, basic principle, it is never good. It is never a good to take human life. And I'm using that as whether innocent or not innocent. It's never a good situation for us to take innocent human life. However, there are circumstances where we would say it is justifiable. Okay, it's never good, but there are times when it is justifiable because there's a worse evil, right? And we're trying to protect innocent life from the worse evil. So for example, a police officer comes into a situation where that police officer has to make a choice. So in order to protect innocent people, they have to use lethal force to stop an aggressor, to stop a perpetrator from something. And let's say there's no other means at their disposal in that moment to stop them, and so they use lethal force. Okay? We would say that there are circumstances like that that are justifiable. Now, no police officer is going to say, hey, that's good. We look forward to those situations when we have to use lethal force. No police officer does that. Just like no soldier, no good soldier who's Christian and Catholic wants to go out and kill people as a soldier. But a good Catholic does want to protect innocent human lives. In fact, we bear the responsibility of protecting innocent human lives. We must do that. Now, hopefully we don't have to use lethal force to do that, but we bear that responsibility. So when we see a group of people whose dignity is being robbed of them, you know, like I think today the unborn, right? Or the elderly in some countries who already have euthanasia, or manipulating them even in assisted suicide, or other groups, that we must fight that. Even if they are not necessarily one of us, in a sense, we must fight the lowering of the dignity of the innocent. We must protect them. Okay, now in saying that sometimes in those circumstances, it can be justifiable to use lethal force. Just like we say, in order to protect your family in your home, there are circumstances where a person could use lethal force in order to protect their family. Okay? All right. Now, Pope Francis is using that principle, so he hasn't changed any principles, he hasn't changed the Church's teachings in any way. He's simply saying that we can no longer use that principle when we're talking about people who are on death row. And he's applying that to the whole world. And every country has different circumstances. So in this, we say, okay, I hope, or I should say, I think the desire of Pope Francis is to elevate us, or to elevate our awareness to the need to protect the dignity of all people. And so instead of looking, maybe capital punishment's the easy path. Maybe it's easier in our mind and in our heart to say, let's just get rid of them, right? And so he's saying, no, let's find a higher path where we're not killing anybody. I think there's something honorable about that. There's something very challenging about that. And it's going to be difficult. And I know we live in a broken world, and the world is not necessarily going to like that message. Okay, when I was growing up, when I was younger, my political views were such that I believed that capital punishment was good. I felt like it was good for a couple of reasons. One, I felt like it was good because I thought it was a deterrent. It's like as a kid, if you do something wrong and there's no consequences, we keep doing something wrong, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse, right? And so if I do something wrong and then I get punished for it, I think twice about doing something wrong. So that was my reasoning to say, well, if somebody knows that they do something really bad, that they may die for it because of capital punishment, or it's at least a threat there, maybe they'll think twice about doing something wrong, right? Maybe there's value to that. Maybe there's some truth to that. But that's where I was at. So I really felt strongly that capital punishment could be a good thing. It could be a deterrent, right? But the other side of me, as I say, was even far less honorable, and maybe it's because I'm a guy, I don't know. Maybe I have anger issues, I don't know. But I also like the thought that the victim could get vengeance, that the victim could get revenge, and that the government would provide a place for there to be this form of vengeance, that when somebody does something really bad, the victim has the opportunity to get back, right? In this case, in the form of capital punishment. Whereas when we send somebody to prison, you almost feel like they got away with it. Because, prison here, it doesn't seem like it's very hard. And especially they just sit around all day and we pay for them to sit around all day. I mean, those are some of the stereotypes of prison. I realize being in prison is not a pleasant thing. But the victims often don't feel like there's been justice done. Now, do you hear Jesus in any of that? I don't. It's our human nature. It's our human nature, and desire for justice is not a bad thing, but our anger or our fears, we want revenge. We want vengeance. And I think capital punishment satisfies that desire more than just sending somebody to prison. But I don't think it's Christian per se. So Jesus Christ, when he comes, he elevates us beyond that, right? He says that we must love our enemy. And so it gives us a different perspective if we were to apply it to this issue. I read a book, I've talked about it before, I read a book a while back about this one prisoner. He was one of the most dangerous imprisoned people we had in the United States. He was basically kept in solitary confinement all the time. And he was in a maximum security prison where we kept all of the notorious, nationally known criminals. And his crimes predominantly were not necessarily because of the crimes he committed outside of prison. I mean, that got him in there. But it's because he kept killing people even in prison. Now, this book was about his life, and when you read about his life, you can't help on some levels but feel for him because of just how his life, what happened that caused him to go down some of those paths, right? But the story is about this Catholic priest who would visit him in prison. Even though he was in solitary confinement, they let a priest go visit him. And just about his conversion. And you really feel like his conversion, there's something very beautiful about it. That you have somebody who's in such darkness, and Jesus brings him out of that darkness into light. And you feel, it's contagious to feel the joy that this person feels from being freed, from having life. And that's what Jesus desires, to give life. So Pope Francis came out and said, one of the things about capital punishment is that we rob the person of the ability to repent and change. And so if we can give them that and keep people safe at the same time, that to me, see, from the perspective of faith, that's a win-win situation. We protect the people, we give this person opportunity to breathe back life into their life and to repent of what they've done. Now that presupposes a lot of things. It presupposes that there's people visiting them and praying for them and desire that conversion. And I don't know if we're necessarily there. I don't know if we desire that quite yet. Or if we're doing what Jesus said for us to go visit the imprisoned and really to minister to them. It also presupposes that we love our enemy and that we can forgive. And all of those are really hard things. And I don't want in any way to downplay the difficulty of someone who's been victimized and just how harmful that pain and how destructive that is, right? Okay, so I hope this doesn't come out that I'm trying to coddle the people who do something bad. Not at all. If anything, yes, be punished, but also give them the opportunity to change. Because I think in the end, if we can help them get to heaven by some radical conversion, then we rob Satan. We rob Satan of all of his power over that whole situation. Okay. Now, I want to give one more perspective, more of a spiritual perspective on capital punishment. Just some of my own thoughts on this, because my heart has changed a lot on this, right? I feel very much for victims, and there's still the natural side of me where I still want vengeance. A lot of times when I see people hurt, I want vengeance for what, but at the same time, kind of the spiritual side where I've changed. Jesus on the cross, right? So behind me, you see just a wood cross, right? What is a cross? For the Romans, during the time of Jesus, it was an instrument of capital punishment. That's how they punished their criminals. who are not Roman citizens, right? Roman citizens, they would cut their head off, right? Non-Roman citizens, they would crucify them. And so Jesus was just one of thousands, if not millions, but thousands of people who had been crucified. It's an instrument of capital punishment. And so you think it's odd that we as Catholics especially, we wear around our neck a cross, an instrument of capital punishment. We put it up in our churches, right in the center, right? We put them in our houses. We put them in our bedrooms. We put crosses everywhere. We put an instrument of capital punishment everywhere. Why do we do that? Because Jesus conquered it. Because in submitting out of love for us, now it might be tempting to say, we blame the Romans for Jesus' death. No. Or the Jewish leaders. No. It was us. It was our sinfulness. That's why he submitted to the cross. To free us from death, right? To give us life. And so the instrument of this capital punishment, it was the instrument of capital punishment that was being used, that he used to become the symbol of life. I am the bread of life. When he's saying those words, he knows very shortly that they're going to take him to Jerusalem and they're going to do that, right? But he is the bread of life. Now, in the Garden of Eden, we're going to go back in time, right? In the Garden of Eden, there were two trees that were mentioned. One, we know what happens, right? It's sin. It's the desire to be God, tree of knowledge of good and evil. But then you have the tree that's off in the background, and that was the tree of life. And that tree is never mentioned again until Jesus dies on the tree, until he dies on the cross. And then he says that he now has made that to be the tree of life. So he's conquered death. And we are to be those instruments. That's why we wear the cross around our neck, right? That's why we have it in our homes. That's why we have it in our churches. And we should be proud of it because it's victory. It's a trophy, if you will, of Jesus Christ's victory in the world. It's victory of him giving life. And so when he was up on the cross, he was bearing fruit. And the fruit was the bread of life, his body and blood, himself. He was giving of himself as fruit for the life of the world. All of this is language that we use all the time in the Mass, in the Scriptures. And I think it makes sense that what we have to offer our world is far more beautiful, far more powerful. And the human side of us wants to succumb to lower things. Vengeance, revenge, whatever it is, right? But we're different. We're Catholics, we're Christians. We wear crosses, we wear instruments of capital punishment around our neck. Why? Because Jesus Christ has conquered it. Because he's victorious. And that we should share with our world with the joy. Whether we're visiting people on death row, show them the cross. Show them Jesus Christ is victorious over it. And he can be victorious over their sin as well. And to the victim, show them the cross. Because they already understand the cross. They've carried it and they've been a victim to it. They've died on it. But they could also share in that victory as well. I didn't say this on Sunday, but it's a phrase that a parishioner shared with me many years ago, and I think it's so powerful. He says, when you're in heaven, you're going to be sitting at the banquet table, and the people around you are going to be the people that you would least likely think, because the only way we can be there is if we've loved our enemies and we've forgiven them. And so the people who are going to be sitting at that banquet table are going to be the people who've hurt us, the people who we've hated, the people whom we victimized. But because of that, we've also repented, we've forgiven, we've asked for forgiveness, we've conquered death and received life. All right. God bless.